Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Scuttlebutt. I'm your host, Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit in Western PA whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. Today's guest is Peggy Simpson. She is not a veteran, and admittedly, she's not even an author, but she has authored a small book called Mental Camouflage. She worked with a veteran who goes by the name James. He's decided to keep his identity a secret for obvious reasons. He was actually a veteran of the Ulster Defense Regiment in Northern Ireland. James experienced a significant amount of trauma starting as a young boy, all the way up through his time in the military. And through conversations I have had with him and the friendship that Peggy has had with him, we decided that we would have Peggy on, who authored the book about his life, to talk about what he experienced and how he's even alive at this point, having survived an attempt on his own life, and the message that he would like to bring to other veterans and other people who've experienced trauma in their life. Peggy got to know James through the church that she works at. He ended up connecting with her. They developed a friendship. There's an article that is written about James that we will have here in the description. I recommend you just clicking on that. Reading that article. It doesn't take very long to read the article because we will talk about the experiences that James has gone through in his life within my conversation with Peggy. But that's what I think is interesting about this particular episode, is that though the veteran that this book is about is still alive, he is concerned that if he were to release his identity, that his family could be in trouble. The complication, I think, is that the trauma that he experienced and what he has found as his purpose in life to be able to let people know that there is still hope. He wants to get that message out. And I agree with him. I think that it is a message that needs to be told. It's a story that needs to be heard. So I was interested to have Peggy come on, talk about the book, how she wrote it, what it's about, a bit about the traumas that James experienced, a bit about his life, a bit about her own life, how she got to be so compassionate to hear and listen to people that have experienced trauma and help them. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation. Please like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell on YouTube so you're the first to know whenever we release new episodes. And please connect with me at Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org. I'd love to hear your thoughts, not only on this episode, but all of our episodes. And if you have any suggestions for future programs, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for supporting the podcast and enjoy the show. Peggy, I really appreciate you spending time with us on the Scuttlebutt today. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. We have a lot to get into about our mutual acquaintance, the veteran that your book, Mental Camouflage, is about. But Peggy, yourself, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Give us a bit of background on yourself.
Okay. First of all, my name's Peggy Simpson, and I am currently living in New Jersey. I grew up in the Philadelphia area and then moved to the Pittsburgh area. My husband was transferred to New Jersey, and now I'm back. I'm going to be back in Pennsylvania again.
And are you an author?
I am not an author. This is the first book I've ever authored.
Okay.
And but I was in the telecommunications industry,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in project management.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I learned about communication.
Yeah. And so you're not a veteran,
I am not a veteran.
and you don't come from a
I'm
military
not-
family?
And well, sort of. My father was not in the military. He was too old for the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
No, too young for the First World War. Too old for the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and plus he had his family by then.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They didn't call him into active duty. But my two brothers were in the military. One was in the Marines, the other was in the Air Force. But they were in the military bands. My one brother was in the President's Own Marine band, and his son then followed suit and was as well. So it's part military, part not military, but I have a heart for the military and how they serve our country, and that, we're here because of them.
Right.
And they pay a big price, whether it's obvious or not obvious.
Well, and that hits the nail on the head. For our audience, if you're listening to the intro, definitely the price that a veteran pays. Not only the sacrifice that they make that we've talked about here on the podcast, but sometimes they experience some significant trauma even outside of the military, and that's sort of what we're here to discuss today. In the intro, I mentioned that James, who you're good friends with, he's a veteran of the Ulster Defense Regiment in Northern Ireland. James and I had a discussion. We talked about the trauma that he experienced from a very young age, all the way up and through the military until now. And he decided that he wanted to remain anonymous, which is fine. So what we decided is we would have you come on and talk about the book that you wrote about him. Now, for our audience, this is a very short book, but a very powerful book. How did you get to know James?
Well, he had called I was working on staff at my church, and he had called the church for some information. Mm-hmm. And I'm part of a healing ministry at our church. So, of course, then that just started conversations. This was way before COVID. Mm-hmm. And then, so I understand part of his story I had gone through myself. Okay. So I could make that connection and how mm-hmm. You get you are traumatized and it never leaves you. Right. So we just became very, very good friends. And
mostly just over the phone then?
Mostly. I've never met him face to face because first we had COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, we had video calls once in a while, but not person to person. Mm-hmm. And so our friendship just grew. I would say he's one of my best friends at this point in time.
So what led to the article? There's an article. We'll have the link in the description here. This was sort of James being able to tell his story. This was prior to the book coming out.
Right. Way prior. Yes. So the American, I can't remember exactly how the connection was made with the American Institute of Stress. And one of their magazines is called Combat Stress. Mm-hmm. So the editor she and I then became very friendly. And so, we had many conversations. And she said, "Can you write, an article?" And James, I tell him sometimes he speaks in bullet points. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't feel comfortable. He would not have been able to write a book about himself. Yeah. And so I said, well, I've never written anything. But anyhow, the editor of Combat, I'm sorry for going backwards.
No, please. That's filling us in on because I think our audience might see the headline of this podcast and say, "What's this about?" And I think that's part of why we're having you on talk about James and his life is we need to understand how we got to the point of having a book. But we're going to go back and talk a bit more about like what specific traumas did he experience? Like why did he decide to put it in a book? And honestly, the main question is how is he even alive at this point? But we'll get to that right now. Yeah, please continue.
So anyhow, the editor of Combat Stress said to me at one point, you really should write a book about this because most of the articles you see, most of the books you see are professionals talking about, what the causations. And so this would be unique in several ways. And not only the military, but PTSD and mental trauma, and it's beyond comprehension how it could have grown. But I think also the acceptance that you're not. I think it's better accepted of people now than it was in the past, and people are beginning to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so James and I started talking. I said, "What do you think about a book?" And he said, I want to help people in whatever way I can, and particularly the military because I was in there. But it was all the causations before that period of time that started what he calls, or what is known as, complex PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And it started in early childhood for him and then continued all the way to the military till he was in the military. And it went several years when he was discharged from the military. He became a breakfast chef.
Mm-hmm.
Just the sound of the pots and pans clanging, or if there was a sudden noise, it would just throw him into such fear.
Yeah.
He couldn't deal with it. So we started writing the book. And I like to think of it as our book or his book. Now, he is very concerned that people would recognize him because he's still young enough.
Mm-hmm.
People are still alive who were in the military at the same time in the UDR. And there were 2 attempts on his life.
Mm-hmm.
And just a lot of horrible things that he went through, and he speaks about
that's what I picked up from the article particularly. It's the first thing I read, and my first thought after reading the article was no one should have to deal with this level of trauma, which I believe is what you're
Yes.
saying when it comes to complex PTSD. Is there a difference between regular I didn't even know there was a difference. Like there was regular PTSD and there's complex PTSD.
Complex PTSD usually starts in childhood.
Okay.
And then it was just one episode after another after another.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what makes it complex, is early childhood PTSD. Okay. Although he didn't know that's what it was at the time.
Right.
And so he was very broken. He mm-hmm. He is still going to counseling, but I see when I first met him and now he has done marvelously. Still has a lot of issues that he needs to deal through. Mm-hmm. But it's like a different person. He is a different person.
Let's define some of that for our audience. Hear me say, like, no one should have to deal with this level of trauma, but in your, and this is all in the book. This is nothing that he is keeping secret. No, he just prefers to keep his identity a secret.
That's the only
right.
thing, because he is so concerned about, he still has relatives who mm-hmm. live in Northern Ireland, and for his own safety. If people would see him and hear him talk, they might recognize.
And that's distinctly because of the 2 factions in Northern Ireland, and that there's still a lot of vitriolic.
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, what did you say? What was the question that you
Well, thank you. I'm sort of leading you there. Is can you give us an idea, sort of I know you said that he talks in bullet points, but can you give us maybe a couple instances of why this trauma started so early for him and how it continued and what he experienced?
Yes. Well, the first traumatic experience was it was trauma as a young boy, and it was from a brother of his best friend, an older brother of his best friend. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't figure out why in the world he even remained friends with his best friend.
So there you're talking like abuse, physical abuse, or like sexual abuse?
Sexual abuse.
Okay.
And then from there it went, you couldn't even, he remembers times when he would be walking down the street with his father, and you would hear the bullets coming. Mm-hmm. And it was like if you were, it originally, it's known as the Troubles.
The Troubles. That's.
And originally it was those who wanted to side with the UK as they were part of the UK at the time, and those who wanted to become part of the Isle of Ireland. And then it became a religious war. And so it was like brother against brother. It was horrible. And it's more than being a soldier. You see your family affected.
Mhm.
There were issues. He, at one point, had gotten to such a point, he tried to commit suicide.
And this was later in his life. This was after his time. He is, I mean, actually is a veteran of that regiment. And this was after that he attempted suicide.
Yes, absolutely. And they had to, even in their houses, they had to worry about looking like no one was home for fear of someone knocking at your door could set you off.
How was his relationship with his brother, with his dad, his mom?
Okay. He was the only boy in the family.
Yeah.
So, but
okay.
Sisters, he had a sister who was she was younger than he, and she did commit suicide, and that affected his life. He went to see her. He heard from a friend of hers and so he went, and she had already died. And there was times when just someone knowing that you were a different religion than they were, even though they were all Christians, they thought it as two different religions. And people could attack you. There was an instance where he was I don't want to tell the whole story. So.
Yeah, there's a bit. It's always difficult when we have an author on, because we're always like, well, without spoiling the book.
And that's what I'm trying to do.
Right, and
I'm succeeding very well.
Well, I mean, we're getting an image now, just an image of like that he experienced trauma from a very young age. Yes. With his friend's brother.
Right.
His family life was very difficult growing up through the troubles.
It was fractured. Yes.
Fractured.
Very much so.
He enlists, or is he drafted?
No, he enlists.
Okay, why did he enlist?
He was from a military family. His dad was in the military. He had uncles, and he even had someone. This is not military related, but I believe it was an uncle who worked on the Titanic.
Wow.
So they were very involved as a family, but mostly military-wise. He still has nephews who are in the military over there. And so that's the direction one would think. Now, his parents, when at one point it was thought that maybe his parents were informants.
Okay.
And so they were tortured. And James believes it ended up in an early death of his mother, the trauma that she went through. So, and it was just one thing after another.
In the military, you said there were 2 attempts on his life while he was in the military?
Yes. Did you want me to go into?
You could give us an overview, sort of, so people can read up more in the book. And it's also, I believe, mentioned in the article. So
Yes. Okay. So the first attempt was someone who they even had sections where the Protestants lived versus where the Catholics lived. And so, but they would have, like, again, sleeper cells. And one person lived in the Protestant section where he did, and invited him to I forget whether it was a party, but it was a gathering.
Yeah.
And so he goes and he's thinking, this really seems strange. Why am I the only one here? There was one other couple there. And he just felt uneasy.
Mhm.
And he heard people coming up the stairs, and he got scared. And he went out, escaped uh, just in time.
And whether that was, I mean, unknown whether that was somebody there to threaten his life or not, the paranoia, I'm sure,
Yes.
is enough to cause some level of trauma of just like,
Yes.
I'm in a place where I don't feel safe, and it's possible what I'm hearing is somebody coming to take my life. So
Yes.
there's got to be,
And he heard later that in fact was the case.
Oh boy.
And the second time was he was driving home from work at the he was still in the military at the time. He was driving home, and there was this car speeding up behind him, and then pulled beside him and shot. But they didn't shoot him, but they were shooting, and he turned. I guess he had, at that point in time, he had a gun under his front seat just because no one was safe. No one. And you couldn't tell by how somebody looked or how they talked. So he turned, and as a result, he lost control of the car. The vehicle overturned, and he ended up in the hospital for I don't remember how long, 2 weeks or something like that. And that was the other attempt on his life. Police were called. There was someone there who was very kind to him. He felt that she was probably an Irish Catholic lady. It was an older lady,
and he's Protestant.
And he's Protestant. Yes. And he said it felt just like an angel had come. And so they did find at least one bullet in the bumper of his car. So those events, I mean, they just pile on and pile on and pile on.
Definitely. So, how did it come to him attempting to take his own life? And what happened there? And, like, again, we get back to the main question, how is he still alive? And then the bigger question beyond that, and the bigger question, I think, then beyond that is why write about it? What did it lead to in his life that he felt like he needed to do something? Right. So,
well, with his sister committing suicide, the thought that his mother died early, like within a year, she had died, and his attempt that just the gun misfired. It just didn't go off when he attempted suicide, because he thought there was just, they were, I believe his wife at the time, I know this, I don't know why I say I believe, was Catholic, and he's Protestant, and so they just weren't so sure about him either, and he figured it just became untenable.
Yeah.
And so that's why he tried to take his own life. His wife happened to come down the stairs as this was going on, and so she saw it, and he said life was not the same after that.
Right.
And so it just, he then, after the military, went to England. He had relatives in England, and that's where he lives now.
Yeah.
And the second part of the question was, okay.
How did this change his life? How did this give him new purpose?
Yes. At first it didn't. He just was, for so many years, 50 years before he got a diagnosis that he had PTSD, that complex PTSD. But with the treatments he was receiving, once it was identified that this was the case, that he did have PTSD, then he was able to get some help.
Mm-hmm.
All those years, he was anxiety and depression and PTSD. Life was just getting worse. He felt that life was just getting worse by the day, and there was no end in sight.
Right.
So once he started with counseling, and they started teaching him ways to deal with it, he'll never be healed completely, but he learned how to deal with it.
Right.
And so counseling helped. Talking about it, he would talk about it at breakfast clubs, and that helped. And just writing the book helped, because
Telling his story.
yeah, telling his story, and not parts of it, but most of his story
Mm-hmm.
is in the book. And that's when I could even see healing being at a deeper level.
Yeah.
And so he, as a result, he feels deeply that he needs to tell his story, because there is help and there is hope. And
So part of writing the book is not only self-healing, but he wants to impart that knowledge of I've been at the lowest you can be,
yes,
and there's still a way out.
yes, yes, and that's what he wants to tell people, because so many people, and he feels his life is spared to tell the story.
Well, certainly, I mean, the lady that helped him after the car accident, the gun not going off, I mean, yeah, there, if you think of, if you believe in there, everything happens for a reason. Hopefully he's taking that reason to say,
And that's what he believes.
mm-hmm.
He was saved for a reason, over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And so his story needs to be told. He feels fervently about that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, when he was going through all this, that certainly was not on his radar screen.
Right.
So since then, there have been other articles that have been written about him, but, that's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And so his goal is to just be able to talk to people who are going through this and giving them the hope that they need.
Yeah.
And that life can be good. It can be good. And I know probably as early as 5 years ago, that's not how he felt.
So what did writing the book do for you, in hearing his story and trying to condense it all into this story that you've written and released and published? Mm-hmm. What did you go through to be able to bring that out?
Well, it was so weird, except for the one connection. And I'm in a healing, I'm a leader in a healing ministry at our church.
Mm-hmm.
So much of it spoke to me, but it never frightened me. I was, befriending a person who, had a lot of trauma in his life, but it almost gave me a goal in life. And I was surprised how easily the words flowed. I would have never, like I said, I never thought of myself as an author.
Yeah.
I don't even like to write, so it's really weird. But there is a bigger purpose. There is a bigger purpose than I would have ever imagined. And, maybe that's helped heal him some. Just knowing there's someone who's not going to ignore you because you frighten me, because you have you've had a traumatic life, and as a result have PTSD.
Right.
Because people, and lots of times people hide it until it gets to the point where they can no longer hide it. And he feels so strongly. Every time we're talking, he mentions, I just want to help somebody else. And people can read books by doctors and everything, and that's a different story that people will hear and from someone who's been through it.
Right.
And he said, if one life can be saved.
How did you decide on the title Mental Camouflage?
He did. And, it's a weird picture.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up and ask, like, how was that decided on?
He said his counselor.
For those, let me interrupt real quick. For those of you listening, if you've downloaded the podcast, the cover of the book is a brain. It seems a brain.
It is.
And in the center of it is sort of camouflage. They've sort of cracked open the brain, and there's sort of a camouflage there. And out of the camouflage is, I believe, a gorilla.
Yes.
That's like screaming.
Yeah.
So that just the head of the gorilla is sticking out of the top of the camouflage out of the brain.
Right.
And it says,
and the hands are trying, you can sort of see it.
Yeah. And the hands are trying to rip out.
Yes.
Yeah, pull the brain apart. And the subtitle is My Mind Gone AWOL.
Yes. Yes.
That's a very striking image. And how was that decided on?
Well, his counselor would often say, you have like monkeys in the brain, or a monkey in the brain.
Yeah.
And so, he's beyond that now. I mean, he realized, and in fact, he has often commented, maybe I shouldn't have wanted that image at the front of the book. Maybe it just frightens people away.
I don't think so. I mean, I only disagree personally. I used to work at a bookstore here in Pittsburgh, and one of the things that would always pull me to a book, because I would shelve books, like one of my first jobs. And one of the first things that would pull me into a book is the cover. And if I saw an interesting cover, I'd be like, oh, what's that? And I would think that this cover, if I saw it sitting on a bookshelf, I'd be like, wow, that's interesting. And I think that if anything, it just pulls you into, and then as you do, you flip to the back to say, what is this about? Because you just see a cover that sort of is striking to you, and then you want to read about what it's about. And like I said, this is a very fast read. You can finish it in the course of an hour, an evening. It's about 40 pages. But that's not to take away from the level of love that you have put into the book. Because I would rather read high quality material for 40 pages than fluff for 700. Yes. So how did you decide to
dense.
Yeah.
Very dense.
Yeah. How did you decide to condense everything, all of everything he experienced, down into 40 pages? How difficult was that?
It wasn't difficult at all.
Yeah.
Like I said, the words flowed, and this was it. I thought, I cannot write another word. This is it. And then just, at the very end, sort of a repass of how the whole thing started and other things that are going on. And the suicide rate, which is higher than, other places in the UK.
Yeah.
England itself, the percentage of people who have taken their own life. And a life lost can never be regained. And I think that became very clear to him. And he feels he has a purpose in life. And that is to walk alongside other people who are dealing through similar issues, maybe the same issues, some of the same issues, and let them know that I've been there, done that. There is help. There is healing.
Right.
You can be taught what to do to alleviate the horrible anxiety you go through. So, and this is firsthand experience. It's not someone saying, well, in the book it says, blah blah.
And his way of dealing with trauma is not only telling his story, but through therapy as well. Yes. We can say, like, there's still hope, but therapy, telling your story, getting it out, talking with other people, that's sort of his way of dealing with trauma.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes. And it appears to have been very effective.
We see that with the Veterans Breakfast Club. We see it all the time, that veterans who've never spoken about their their experiences in the military, their life, will come and sit at a breakfast and hear another veteran talk, and it inspires them to stand up and tell their story, whatever part of that story they want to tell. But it's certainly, as we say here, stories unite us. We want those stories to be out there. We want them to be able to come into a community and feel safe and be able to have a platform to tell what they've gone through, trauma or otherwise. It could be, that they had a good time in basic, and part of that is saying, yeah, what we did in this was fun. And but certainly it helps to heal trauma. Now, how has been the reception of the book?
Surprisingly enough, I don't think people can buy it from the bookshelves, like in a Barnes and Noble. They'll order it for you, you'll receive it at home in like 4 or 5 days. But I think the fact that it's not on the shelves has limited, distribution.
Right.
And so I haven't made a penny on it, and that's okay. But
you don't become an author to become rich. It's
never. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But and it's not about me. It's not about the fact that I wrote a book. It's about this person who has gone through so many traumas in his life, but can still see light at the end of the tunnel.
How did his story help to give you clarity in your own life?
Well, I'll tell you, it helped me in being a leader in this. It's like a step program, but it's not for like alcohol or drug abuse. But it's all women or all men, and it gave me clarity and understanding and compassion for the women I deal with.
Yeah,
and they have many different traumas, and it helped me to even be more compassionate with them.
It's interesting that you say more compassionate, because
I'm compassionate to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be in the work that you are doing. You have to be able to listen, be empathetic, be compassionate.
Yes.
And you have to have a high level of that. Not many people can sit and listen to trauma for hours at a time and come out the other side and be like, okay, I'm gonna go have dinner and not feel sad and depressed and let all of that in. You have to have a good wall. You have to be very confident, I think. Yeah. So, I mean, for this book and his story to give you more compassion, that says a lot.
And I don't, that's not why I even got into it. First, well, your story is interesting. And I remember in the very beginning, I had childhood trauma as well. And so, but I have found, it took me a long time to ever admit it. Never told my kids until just recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was their uncle who was, my brother, it was in my case. And my brother has since died, so maybe I felt more confident talking about it. I'm not afraid to talk about anything now.
Yeah.
And just and to let we're all broken. I don't care who you are. No one escapes that.
Right.
And so I think people need to be aware of that. And I am, and I know at the end of every session, I always tell. It's many on one. It's a small group experience.
Yeah.
And I always tell them I love them, and they know that there is no judgment. We're not called to judge.
Right.
We're called to love.
Well, I can think of no better message to end on, Peggy. We're going to have the link to the article here. We're going to have a link to where you can get mental camouflage. So that people can look this up. I hope that they do. I hope that they read about James, read his story, let that ruminate, and they can reflect a bit, and let his story sort of help change their life as well, if need be. I certainly gained some clarity after reading his story, and it makes me appreciate things a lot more, because you don't realize how not to sweat the small things, to use the term, until you hear.
Yeah, that's one way it has helped me.
Yeah.
Don't sweat the small stuff, and most of it is.
That's exactly. To our audience, I hope that you like, share, subscribe, ring the bell on YouTube so you're the first to know whenever we release new episodes. If you are interested in hearing more about Peggy and mental camouflage, please connect with me, Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org. Peggy, I want to leave you with the final words here. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Scuttlebutt. I'd like to take a moment to thank both of our sponsors, the first being D&D Metal Recycling and Auto Salvage. They began as a small hauling and used auto parts operation in the Pittsburgh area in the late 1970s, but they've grown into a full-service metal recycling company with 2 locations, Lawrenceville and Tarentum. D&D accepts all types of metal, both ferrous and non-ferrous, that may be generated by industrial manufacturing, construction and demolition, small commercial entities, as well as individual customers. They have a wide variety of material handling equipment and are capable of managing any type of job in a timely and efficient manner. You can contact them for quotes and availability at D&D. That's D&D Autosalvage.com. Thank you so much to D&D. They've been a sponsor for quite some time, and we really appreciate their support. The second being Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. They are dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and to getting the word out about the hazards of smoking and secondhand smoke. They're all about health. So they want people to quit, and they have classes and nicotine replacement therapy and a popular quit line, which is the easiest number to remember ever, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They also educate people, children especially, about tobacco use from cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chew, snuff, and other nicotine products like vaping. Finally, Tobacco-Free Adagio Health advocates for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all of what Tobacco-Free Adagio Health offers at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org, or you can watch our recent episode with Tobacco-Free Adagio Health on the Scuttlebutt, where they talk about a lot of the programs that they offer for those who are looking to quit. Thank you to both of our sponsors for their continued support of the Scuttlebutt podcast. We really appreciate it. Thanks.